So, for the people who don't know, I think it's a really great way to start to talk about how many films you both have worked on together because you have a long-standing collaboration, and I think it would be important for people to know the breadth of that collaboration.
So, A Thousand Cuts is the fifth feature-length documentary that Leah and I have collaborated on. So basically, from my very first film to this one. And I cannot imagine making a film without Leah. I really can't. It's true.
Yeah, that was 1998, maybe. So that we met.
Yeah.
So.
It's been a while.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's interesting about that too is out of the five films that you've done together is that they're very different from each other. It's not like there's this style of film that you guys are making and that you repeat that style every time. I mean, obviously there's a kind of stylistic conversation between those films, but some of them are really different. And because I think that like Motherland is like a pure observational film, and that's a very different approach to the editing versus something like Don't Stop Believing, your film about the Journey singer, the guy who basically took on the mantle of taking over for the lead singer of Journey. That's got this musical element to it. It's still a character-based story, but it's a very different structure. So I'm curious then, how did you determine the language for this film?
In a rush, basically, because of the time, just because of how it unfolded. So in 2019, 2018, I started shooting in 2018, right, Leah? Yeah, 2018. And then we cut a sample, we put together a deck. And by 2019, I was on the ground doing what I call principal photography. And in my films, I usually like containers to the film. I want to know when it starts and when it ends. I don't like the idea of shooting forever. I mean, that sort of drives me a little bit crazy. So I like containers. So I knew with 1,000 Cuts, I finally had my container, which was the midterm elections. And I wrapped that, and Leah already by then started look at footage. And we were in constant touch when I was in the Philippines. I would tell her, oh my God, this character's interesting. This character's not. This character fell through. Maria Ressa is like now the sort of center of gravity of the film. So she was in on all that sort of my, what I call data dumping.
But I remember there was a new character at one point, and I was like, what? Another character?
Yes, I call Leah and data dump. I data dump. That's what I think of it. I'm just dumping things that's in my head, so she knows what's going on in my thinking process, and then she looks at that footage based on our conversations, because that's, I think, the most efficient way to do it. And then we wrapped. We wrapped right after elections, and then we're still shooting. You know, Maria traveling around the country and stuff, but already Leah was cutting, and then we had a first cut, and then Sundance came around, right? The deadline. We're like, should we submit? Should we not? It's too early. But we submitted. We said, whatever. It's Sundance. You got to submit. And then we got in, right? And we had just started cutting, and we're like, oh yay! Oh no, right? It's like, oh my God. So what was, we gave ourselves 10 months? The usual, whatever, 10, 11 months of post was now cut down to 4 months, because this was like October, November, even less, right? End of October or something, crazy, October, November, December.
I just saw a shadow pass across Leah's face as she remembered 4 months. Yeah.
It was less. So
that was an airplane.
Was hurry. Yeah, it was hurry. And so, but by then, I think, how did we do it, Leah? I don't even know now. A lot of
we were edit zombies.
A lot of tension, a lot of arguments. But we got through it. I think what I love are characters, right? I always say what we do differently from journalism, is we make films about behavior. Right? Behavior is key. So you follow that behavior. So you follow characters. So once we chose which characters that that guided the form. That guided the form of the film, and then just put the characters in and then fill in the things. Right? I don't know. It sounds simple, but we always have what I call golden moments. Right? I pick golden moments when I start filming. I make a list and I give it to Leah, and then she looks at it, and she all has her own golden moments. Some overlap with mine, some do not, because obviously lived experience is different from an experiencing it, just through the lens. Footage is different from lived experience. So we go back and forth, talk about that, put it up on a wall, and try to make some sense of it and some structure to it, which is still very much a puzzle. But we basically start with the yummy parts. We basically start with the best yummy scenes, and we don't start in the beginning, because if you start in the beginning, you'll never start, right? So it's like what she loves to do, like, okay, she's attracted to the scene, she'll start doing that. And then just keep on putting it up on walls and then see what sticks, basically. So that's what we did.
So question for you. This film, it's like many of your films, it's a character-based story around one central person, Maria Ressa, but it's also a political thriller, and it also requires all this context for non-Filipino viewers so that we have an understanding of the world in which Rappler lives, the Maria lives, etc. How did you handle the balance of that? And did it change over the time that you were editing? Because you're basically telling a couple stories. There's the story of misinformation and the whole internet misinformation thing. There's Maria's personal story. There's this political story of the upcoming election and kind of tracking people. So was there a time when one had different weight than the other, and part of the process was figuring out how to interweave those? Can you speak a little bit about that, Leah, what that was like?
I think I know there is one section where we try to tackle some of that backstory, and their question was like, where do we need that? Can we drop you in a little bit and like let that come a little bit later? How much information are you going to need to really feel settled? And so it ended up coming in a little bit later. We could go back to it. I think we didn't have time to play that much with how it was going to be and where it was going to be. And it felt, where it felt right was where it was going to, that's pretty much where it was going to rest. It was a matter, the information needed to come down a little bit because, you want to lay out more and try to, but I think the basic or the gist of that information was, try to, maybe we got it down to 5 minutes or something like that, like that backstory, right? It was,
and it's not just the backstory. It's like you weave that all the way through, right?
I don't even realize how we do it because it's something.
No, I think that's where Leah really comes in, because she is sort of an insider-outsider by now, right? I'm very much sometimes an insider, and I take for granted what things I know. And then Leah comes in and says, not everyone will know that. What does that mean even? So she's the one who unpacks it in the film and says, okay, this sort of, at this point, we have no idea what's going on. Right? So she's the one, but it comes up. Basically what we do, how I think about it is, we make this film, we drop you into situations, and our job is to really make you forget what you don't know. Because if you are watching the film and you're questioning, when was whatever, when was the independence of the Philippines? We're not doing our jobs. We're not, then the film is not, the story is not so compelling that your mind wanders to all these other things that you can Google later on, right? You can Google all those things, but our job is to really sweep you away with the story and then realize, oh, I don't know that one thing. Let me look it up. So that's always what Leah and I are doing. It's like, is it compelling enough to make you stay in the moment and really make you understand this moment without thinking of other things that maybe don't really help the moment, right? So that's always the plan. That's always the intention.
So my question then is, because you have these multiple threads, there's some have more weight than others, right? And so when you were making this film, did you find that something that had more weight ended up not having so much weight, or something that had less weight and became more? And I'm just curious, in the process, what ended up shifting from, like, you thought it was going to be a much bigger thread and then it either lessened or vice versa?
I think if we could make, the 1,000 Cuts series of like, if we could do the 4-hour, 6-hour television series, we would have explored Mocha Usan so much more. There's so much there. She is her own movie, in a way. She's a counter story that could hold equal time to Maria. Just fascinating. So I think that was something that was really hard to shape, less into that. Okay. Still keep her, as being important, relevant, and so much meaning that she holds in the film. But yeah.
Because the original intention was really to have a sort of ensemble film. So the original intention was, I describe it as very Robert Altman-esque, where all the characters are equal and they play off each other as an ensemble. But as it happens, Maria, like I said, became sort of the center of gravity of the film and had more weight, visual weight, story weight, everything. That, Mocha is like a really interesting character. And there were some scenes there that, oh my God, we hung on to till the very end, that were fascinating, but at the end of the day had nothing really to do with the main story and was bogging it down. And so you have to let it go. Even Bato, there were things in Bato. I mean, his interview in the swimming pool could have been so much longer. But you have to really, and we went on this whole tour with him down south on his motorcycle, right? That's a whole other film. But we had to really, and some of the shots were just gorgeous, right? But we had to really cut those, take some of those out, which were, it's heartbreaking. But you do it, you yank it like a Band-Aid. It's like, don't think about it, just a Band-Aid, stick it out. Don't think about it anymore. But of course, you mourn it. It's like, all these scenes. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have these golden moments that you remember, and I always think of them as like pivotal scenes. And I always find that there's one or two scenes when I'm editing that wherever I put it in the narrative, it changes everything. And so finding the exact right place for that scene is so important, because I understand the main character completely differently once I see that scene. And so I'm just curious, did you have one or two scenes like that in the edit room for this film, and what were they?
I think, and Leah might think different, but I think it's Maria with her sister in the hotel room talking about fear. I think earlier would have taken off something. I don't know, would have been very different than if, that's why we chose to put it later, because it revealed a lot more about Maria later in the film, which then made her whole trajectory make sense. I think earlier it would have lost its power, but where we had it was, I think, where it was hard to find that the place for that. But when we finally found it, it's like, then it makes everything, like her old narrative arc, her entire trajectory makes sense, because then you're like, oh, she is like that. There is fear there, but this is how she handles it. What do you think, Lee?
I agree. That was one that we did play around with, the placing of more than most of them. Yeah, that one.
Were there any others, Leah, that you'd add to that were, that kind of moved around? It's like, there's no doubt it's going to go in, right?
When you said that, when you said this, when you started talking about it, I thought you were going to say scenes that you love that you can't find a place for.
We'll get to that one too.
Oh. And so my brain was thinking about that, but other scenes that changed I mean, I think also the arrest, I mean, because we could start with the arrest could come. I mean, it's an obvious thing. It's like, when are you ready for her to get, to have that happen? That kind of kicks off a lot. And, that was the first scene that Ramona shot when she went back to the Philippines to start. So, it was kind of like, where is that gonna, when are we ready for that? Maybe that's something that's pretty vital.
Yeah, so we chose an in between, basically. Basically, you see her get arrested, but it's not very clear what's happening. We basically stripped the sound. We stripped it of its sound, and then sort of reprised it later on. And you're like, oh, she was getting arrested there. But in the beginning, you don't really know, because they're just talking about Maria Ressa as being this icon of press freedom, so you don't really know what's happening. So I think we chose the middle ground. It's like, maybe let's right, because it was getting late in the day, and we're like, oh, maybe let's just strip it so it's ambiguous enough, but yet compelling, that obviously there's something happening to Maria, but then you find out later on clearly that she was being arrested.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To get back to the other question, then, what couldn't you find a place for that you loved, that you wanted in, and then it got left on the bench, and it still kills you to this day? We always have those children that got left behind.
It's the candy scene, right, Ramona?
Of Mocha. Yes. Oh my God.
Mocha
yes.
giving out candy and sex education advice.
Yeah, so she was with Mocha Usan was talking to street kids that she obviously knew. It wasn't, and what was magical about it is it was so clear she wasn't playing to the camera, because she knew these kids. Mm-hmm. She would talk to them after every show that she did at that club, right? So she knew them, she was familiar with them, and she was giving them advice. Please use condoms, okay? And then, so, it really very graphic. It's like, don't take it in the butt, but if you have to take it in the butt, then use condom. Make sure it makes. I mean, it was so amazing and real, and made you think of Mocha completely differently, and I wanted that nuance. I wanted that layering of Mocha, but we couldn't find a place for it. It seemed really to stick out, and we're like, oh, maybe here, maybe there, maybe, but it was obviously for another film that we will do. Maybe, who knows? We never will. But yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was pretty amazing, because she goes right to the heart of, and she tells them not to take drugs, right? She gives them, it's like, don't take drugs, okay? Don't, because HIV and the needles and stuff. It was really hard. I don't know. It was very real. It was very real. She wasn't playing to the camera, because you knew the kids knew her. There was something really sweet, about that.
She had a real connection to another world that we weren't seeing so much. Yeah. Interesting.
Now, I understand that the cut that you showed at Sundance was longer than the cut that's now. Can you speak about what you did to the film after Sundance, how much you took out, and what you took out and why?
I guess we cut about almost 21 minutes or something.
Yeah.
It's funny, you do it and then you kind of have to forget what you took out. It's like, oh, I don't want to remember. What did we take out of that?
Because Concordia Frontline told us to. No, don't put that. Cut that out. Double exposure.
I know. I think the film still stands really strong.
No, for sure.
I mean, obviously we're watching, we don't know what's different, but was there like a storyline that got cut out, or was it just shortening things?
A lot of tightening things. I don't think we cut out any kind of storyline.
Well, the major thing that we did was like the Rappler origin story. We cut that out. Yeah. And simply because it wasn't flying, we started with the origin story. We introduced sort of the 4 women who co-founded Rappler, but we never ever go back to the three other women. So they get lost in the narrative, and then we go back to them later on in the film, and you're like, wait, who are these three women? You forget. So it just didn't. And in the end, the film was as strong without that origin story. And I think based on that, then we could cut out a lot of other things, small things. Based on that, we took out a lot of election footage as well, right? Really. Of the general, which was a shame. A lot of the spectacle and dancing, because
the singing and the dancing, yes. And I guess with that Rappler story, the relationship with her founders, the women that she works with, it didn't, there's a relationship there over the years that they've built that's not there.
Yeah. Okay. But we found that wasn't that in the story still held. And we found one song goes a long way. We love the singing. We can't get enough of Bato singing.
I can't get enough of her singing. It's unbelievable.
There was one singing that, okay. So this was one other scene, Mocha singing at the end to kids again, right? And it was very close and beautifully shot because it's right there, and it's nighttime. So, and then the flare of the lights and stuff, that was quite beautiful that we had to get rid of, because it's like, again, singing. I'm enamored of singing because there's a reason that the elections are like the backdrop of this film, because I knew elections would be full of spectacle and it would be kinetic and all that. So, but I think a little goes a long way, I guess, because we took a lot of that out. And I think it's still very apparent what elections are in the Philippines.
Because everybody has their own little campaign song that goes with the campaigning, they put their name in there and their little program that they're campaigning for. It's really, this country, we're just a few, months away from that happening, probably.
Right. We don't have singing politicians, though. It's incredible that like all the politicians are singing and dancing. Not everybody, but some of them. It's something else.
Most of them.
Yeah,
most of them. Okay. I think there were times even where the spouses were brought up to sing with the candidates, and you could tell they were reluctant to, but it's something they have to do, to play to the crowd. They understand that kind of campaigning, this entertaining, and singing. And it was painful to watch some of those the spouses come on, because you knew they were reluctant, but they had to do it. And they didn't have a voice either. It was like not a good thing to do. It was painful to watch some of those.
There's one shot of all the candidates still on stage dancing together. I think it's still in there, so that's glad.
Yeah. We kept some of those. Yeah.
I'm wondering, it's very obvious that Maria lives in a great deal of peril, and that she's taken on an incredible amount of risk in her life, and she's living with that risk. And I'm just wondering if you faced something in the edit room where there were things that you knew, that she knew, that you could not include in the story because it would put her in greater danger or put her colleagues in greater danger. And if you needed to think about those concerns when you were editing, in terms of protecting Maria or protecting her colleagues as you were editing the film and deciding what story you wanted to put out in this film.
Yeah.
Yes. But that's such
talk about that process. You don't need to tell us what you didn't put in, but I'm just curious about, was that an element of what you needed, what you were dealing with in the edit room? And if so, how did you deal with it?
We went in, listen, Maria and Rappler gave us a lot of access. Places that, strategy meetings with lawyers and stuff, places that we had no business being in, but she gave it to us, with the understanding that at the end, I was going to run some things by them that we weren't sure would put them in trouble, because then I wouldn't want to expose strategy and things that would, give them, I mean, put them in more trouble, right? That would be crazy. So that was the deal. It's like they didn't have time to really censor us and say you can't do this, you can't do that. They just opened the floodgates. Just film everything you want, but please let us know if you think it's going to put us in trouble. So we really cut the film, knowing that some things we could never keep, but we thought, let's try it, because they were amazing scenes, right? But we knew it would put them in trouble, and then why would we want to do that? And that was our agreement, right? I mean, it wasn't for content, it wasn't like censoring whatever, but it was an agreement. If there are some things that legally would put them in hot water, why would we do it? And I promised them I would not do that in order to give us full access. So there were, right? I mean, Leah, there were lots of legal meetings that were incredible, but
Yeah.
Uh,
They were pretty open. In the end, I feel like they let us put in more than I think I would have thought even they would have, they were pretty permissive with us, letting us do what we wanted, I thought.
I mean, there was one scene that is not in the film anymore because it was a thread of the Rappler origin story, but where the founders are talking about what happens when they get shut down. What's going to happen? Who's going to escape? How are you going to do this? That was a scene that I so loved, but then when we took out the Rappler origin story, it no longer made sense, right? Because who are these women that she's talking to and planning her, like basing her, or trusting so much? So that also went, yeah. That was a regret I had, that scene, because it was so hard earned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you end up showing Maria and Rappler the whole film before you finished, or just certain pieces?
I went back and showed them the whole film, and then there were things that and Maria knows, and most of them, they're journalists, so they keep to this code of ethics that they cannot censor us, right? Because they gave us this access. So they kept to it, which is amazing. They have this set of values, right? It's incredible. It's like, yeah, we understand that you have to tell this story. We gave you the story. We're not going to tell you how to make this film. But only, so I showed them the whole thing. And there were some things like, really? Do you have to show me? Yeah, Maria, that's not the part I really want you to look at. It was very obvious which parts, the legal parts and stuff. And I said, okay, look at this, look at it. And then, they'd look at that. But there were some things, do you really have to show my legs swinging? And I'm like, I do, right? But beyond that, no, they really understood. They're journalists, so they really stick to that value of not getting in the way of telling the story. It's really incredible. And that was Rappler wide. That was all of Rappler, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, I do remember sending some scenes for them to look at more closely, but I don't think it wasn't a big, just they wanted to look at it closely, vet it more, and I think it wasn't a big conversation around it.
Yeah, the lawyers would chime in and they'd be like, I think it's okay. What do you think it's okay? And we're like, okay, it's okay. Just as long as the lawyer said it's okay, we're fine, right? We're not gonna. Yeah. Yeah, but it was really interesting working with journalists in that way, because they really understood the how sacrosanct the story is, and independence, right? How the independent story should be told. Yeah, they understand that it's part of their ethics as journalists. So that was really interesting.
You mentioned that you never start with the beginning. I know some filmmakers who start with cutting the end. And I know for myself, the last thing I cut is the beginning and the end. Like I kind of build out from the middle. And I often find that there's this magic tube between the beginning and the ending. And there's scenes that can go either place and they work perfectly because they're great framing things, right? So I'm curious, what was the process for the two of you to figure out the beginning and the ending of the film? When did you figure it out? Did you also find things that went back and forth or no?
I feel like the beginning was always, yes, the hard part, finding that moment that kind of Ramona would like a moment, I know, that encapsulates the story and the kind of themes and, you know, what it's about. And I guess that was a little bit hard to find. It always is, you know, because sometimes she knows right off the beginning. She's like, that, you know, she films it and she's like, that's it. But this, sometimes it's not like that too. So it's like, this one was a little bit of moving that opening scene in the Rappler up and forward and backward. And then it just kind of was like, why don't we just try? You know, the first time we put it there, it was kind of like, why didn't we think of that before? That just made sense. Yeah. So you don't really know until you try sometimes, you know, you just got to try something that try everything maybe.
Yeah, I always like things that encapsulate the film, but not in an obvious way. So I love dropping people in the middle of, like, in media res, right? In the middle of action without explanation, and then you'll sink or swim. You'll get it. After a while, you'll get it. But I love, like, starting in the middle of the conversation. And that's what happened, like, this film too. It's like in the middle of covering the State of the Union address. It's like, where are we? What? Rappler headquarters? But I think what we always say is we need to trust the audience. We need to trust the audience that they will stick with us, right? But because if they don't, then we're not doing our jobs. But we gotta trust that they will. It's compelling enough that they will they'll sign on. Say, okay, we're gonna sign on to this journey because this is an interesting opening scene. And I love opening scenes that are shot beautifully, right? Because I think the opening scene of 1,000 Cuts was verite, but shot in this very sort of fiction way where it focuses on Maria at just the right time. I mean, I had great cinematographers, but sometimes you don't get that. And you're like, oh my God, that's really a great scene. But you don't, like you said, you don't know it until you know it, or you don't know it until in context. So yeah, and then you stick to it. And people say, what is an opening scene? We don't get it. We're like, you're gonna get it after a while. You don't have to get it right there and then. It just has to be compelling enough to say, interesting. Let's see what this is about. And then move from there. You have an idea what it's about, and then move from there.
And the ending, how did you figure out the ending for the film? What was the process of that?
We had no ending, Laura. I had to fly. We were cutting. I had to fly back to Manila to get an ending, to film an ending, because we thought at some point one of our cases was going to be resolved. But it was now December 2019, January 2020. Our premiere was around the corner, nothing yet. So I flew back, and so that ending at Sundance was Christmas 2019. I filmed that like as we were like in the midst of craziness. And I wanted to film on something
3 weeks hopeful. Before Sundance was that. No, that was exactly a month before the premiere, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in.
The premiere was January 22nd, and that was December 25th.
I was in Manila shooting. So I wanted to be hopeful, not to be Pollyannish or anything, but to mirror Maria's optimism, because she is a very optimistic person. So I wanted to mirror that and pay homage to her hopefulness. She always is. So that Christmas scene was how the Sundance cut ended. And then, of course, months later, into the pandemic, as you see, there is an epilogue in the film where it ends with one of her cases being resolved, her verdict being handed down, and they're already in masks and all. It's COVID, obviously. And that was sort of the ending we thought we were going to get before premiering in any place. But it happened, obviously, after the premiere, post-pandemic. And I kind of like ending there because it really brings it to the present moment without ever talking about the pandemic. But you see everyone in masks now. So it's obviously time has passed and we're now in COVID, right? It's such a shorthand to tell people when this happened and how soon after, Christmas, the first ending.
It works. I mean, it's incredible to have that update. And I'm so glad that you did that before your theatrical release, because it's such it's such a moving film, and it's so gripping, and you're just, Maria is just so incredibly brave and empathetic, and you're just pulling for her. And to see that that's still going on during the pandemic it's incredible. So I'm so glad that you went back and got that. It made a big difference. It's a very, very interesting way to end.
But it's such a different ending now. I mean,
Mhm.
the Sundance ending was so much. I mean, you can imagine it ends Christmas. It ends with her saying, yeah, whatever she says. We can't become monsters to fight the monsters or something, or the country's behind us. Let's rally together. And so that it ended on a high note. Suddenly it ends now with her verdict, which is a gut punch, right? So the ending was so different at Sundance, but I think I do like this ending too, because it's not a forced optimism, and yet she is optimistic. Like the situation is not, because she now has a 6 year sentence hanging over her head, and yet she's optimistic. It's like you cannot be you can't shut up, because you will if you do, you will lose your rights. So don't shut up, right? That's still her message. So she herself is still optimistic, even if the thing that's happened to her is not so very much, right? It's not. It's a very grim reality. So that, yeah, I really like the ending now. I think it's very true to the story and true to Maria too. Yeah. I always think, what would this film be if we had the 12 months, right? Would it be very different? I don't know. Always an interesting thought for me, because we worked on it so fast that it's surprising that they made sense of all that footage.
Yeah.
And I think it also helped that Leah and I by then had collaborated on other films. It was this shorthand. We have a shorthand. It's like, that I think would not have been possible if this was our first film together.
And the trust that we could get there in that, so that we would get to something, in that time period. Yeah.
Oh, but it is, at the end of the day, it's hard. It's ineffable, right? It's really hard to explain everything, because there is that magical element that happens that's unknowable, and and forever will be, right? And I think that is the magic of film. It just sometimes you chance on it, you happen on it, but it's really trusting the footage, trusting your collaborator, trusting the footage, and trusting your audience.
Mhm.
So those are three key elements. And once that all aligns, then you're sort of in this groove, and you get there somehow.
I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing details of going under the hood in the edit room. It's something that people don't get a chance to talk about a lot, but as we know, it's like the key to like every single thing about making these films. And it's been so great to hear from both of you about a little bit about your process of how you made all your films happen, but in particular, this really amazing last film, 1,000 Cuts.
Thank you.
Laura.